March 12, 2026, Honda cancels 3 flagship EVs overnight, $11 billion postponed. Who blinks next? Honda had committed hard, 40% of global sales electric by 2030. CEO Toshihiro Mibe locked in billions across factory investments, supplier contracts, and platform development. The Honda 0 Series debut at CES 2024 was the public face of that commitment. Then the market said no. But here's the problem. The entire EV market boom was not built on consumer demand. It was built on policy. And when the policy changed, the floor did not crack. It vanished. For 3 years, from roughly 2021 through 2024, the electric vehicle market looked like a runaway train. Sales charts pointed straight up. Startups raised billions. Legacy automakers announced trillion-dollar pivots. Narrative was airtight. The world was going electric, and the only question was how fast. Federal tax credits of up to $7,500 per vehicle, tightening of regulations, and aggressive state-level mandates were all pushing in the same direction. Automakers built their 5-year plans around those incentives. They had to. Without them, the math on battery electric vehicles simply did not work. Then came September 30th, 2025. On that date, U.S. federal EV tax credits were terminated, not phased out gradually over a decade. Terminated. The regulatory supports that have been propping up consumer demand were pulled out in a single policy move, and the market responded with brutal, immediate honesty. EV market share in the United States had peaked at 10.6% in the third quarter of 2025. By the first quarter of 2026, it had collapsed to 5.8%. That is not a dip. That is a near halving in 2 quarters. Cox Automotive reported that U.S. EV sales fell 27% year over year in Q1 2026, 27% in a single year. At the exact moment when every major automaker had committed billions to scaling up production. Think about what that number actually means. Ford had been losing an estimated $4 billion per year on its EV division. General Motors had poured tens of billions into the Ultium platform. Stellantis was burning cash on electrification programs across a dozen brands. Every single one of them had justified those losses the same way. We are buying market share now. The subsidies make it viable. The regulations require it. The future will reward us. That logic collapsed the moment the credits disappeared. What the subsidy removal exposed was something the industry had been quietly aware of, but publicly unwilling to say out loud. Battery electric vehicles at current technology and production costs are fundamentally more expensive to build than comparable internal combustion or hybrid vehicles. A midsize BEV costs somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 more to manufacture than its ICE equivalent, depending on battery size and chemistry. Without the government check bridging that gap, the sticker price lands in territory that shuts out the majority of American car buyers. The average new vehicle transaction price in the US was already above $48,000 in early 2026. Add the true BEV premium on top of that, and you are pricing out the exact consumers automakers need to hit volume targets. Dealers started reporting inventory pileups across markets from Phoenix to Detroit. Incentive spending by manufacturers spiked as they tried to paper over the price gap with their own cash. Lease rates were subsidized to keep monthly payments competitive, but every dollar spent on those incentives was another dollar of loss on every unit sold. Automakers were essentially running a loss leader program at industrial scale, and the policy environment that had made that strategy defensible had just evaporated. Ford's CFO, John Lawler, acknowledged in a February 2026 earnings call that the Model E division's losses were, quote, not sustainable at current volume trajectories without a significant shift in either cost structure or demand. That was the most direct public admission from a major automaker that the EV business model as constructed was broken. The sticker shock was real, the demand destruction was real, and every automaker with a major EV commitment was now staring at the same impossible arithmetic. You can absorb losses when the regulatory environment rewards you for it. You cannot absorb losses indefinitely when the market is contracting and the subsidies are gone. Honda saw the numbers, and Honda started making calls. The EV gold rush had not ended because the technology failed. It ended because the economics were never actually there. That is not a minor correction. That is a foundational reckoning. And the worst part for every boardroom watching it unfold was that the warning signs had been visible for at least 18 months before anyone acted on them publicly. Now, here's the part that makes the whole story click into place. The market collapse was one thing, but what happened inside the regulatory framework in December 2025 changed the legal and financial calculus for every automaker on Earth. For years, U.S. emissions regulations had been structured in a way that effectively penalized automakers for investing in hybrid technology over battery electric vehicles. The Clean Air Act frameworks, combined with aggressive EPA tailpipe standards set under the previous administration, created a compliance architecture that treated full battery electric vehicles as the gold standard. Hybrids earned partial credit, plug-in hybrids earned more. But pure BEVs were the only path to full compliance without penalty. That regulatory structure was the legal backbone of the EV-first strategy. It forced automakers to eat losses on EVs because the alternative, scaling hybrids instead, meant falling short on emissions compliance and facing regulatory penalties that could run into hundreds of millions of dollars per year. On December 15, 2025, the EPA updated its rules to be fully technology agnostic. That phrase sounds bureaucratic. The implications are enormous. Technology agnostic means the EPA no longer mandates a specific powertrain path to compliance. Hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and battery electric vehicles are now treated as equal pathways. An automaker can hit its emissions targets by scaling a best-in-class hybrid program just as effectively as by scaling a BEV program. The penalty structure that had made BEV losses a necessary cost of doing business was removed entirely. Consider what that means in practice. Ford's EV division was losing roughly $4 billion annually. General Motors had written down billions on EV-related investments. Stellantis had been burning capital across multiple electrification programs simultaneously. Every one of those losses had been partially justified by the argument that regulatory compliance required it. The fines for not meeting BEV targets were worse than the losses from selling EVs at a loss. That calculation, which had held the entire industry's EV commitment together like a load-bearing wall, was gone. Honda's legal and financial team would have run the numbers within days of the December 15th announcement. The analysis would have been straightforward and devastating. The regulatory floor that justified absorbing EV losses had been removed. The consumer demand that was supposed to grow into those losses had collapsed with the subsidy termination in September. And the competitive landscape had shifted dramatically, with Chinese manufacturers producing battery electric vehicles at cost structures that Western automakers simply could not match. BYD's average selling price in key markets was running 30 to 40% below comparable Western BEV offerings. Not because of lower quality alone, but because of a fundamentally different and more mature battery supply chain built over 15 years of domestic Chinese investment. The technology-agnostic ruling did something else too. It gave Honda permission to say publicly what its engineers had known privately for years. The company's hybrid technology was world-class. The two-motor hybrid system in the CR-V, the Accord, and the Insight had been refined over 2 decades. Fuel economy figures from Honda's best hybrid platforms were competitive with or superior to many plug-in hybrids in real-world driving. The system cost curve was dropping. The reliability data was excellent. Honda had a genuinely competitive product sitting right there, ready to scale, and the regulatory structure had been actively discouraging them from leaning into it. After December 15th, that obstacle was gone. Honda no longer had a regulatory reason to keep absorbing BEV losses, and with the market data from Q4 2025 and Q1 2026 now on the table, it no longer had a financial reason either. The decision that came in March 2026 was not made in a panic. It had been building for months, one data point at a time. The rules changed, and Honda moved faster than anyone expected, and then a company that had spent 3 years publicly committed to an EV-first future looked at the data, looked at the regulations, looked at the market, and simply decided to blow the whole thing up. Honda is not a company that makes impulsive decisions. The engineering culture inside Honda is methodical, data-driven, and deeply conservative about public commitments. When CEO Toshihiro Mibe announced the 40% EV target in 2023, that was not a marketing headline. It was a strategic declaration backed by capital allocation, factory planning, and supplier contracts. Reversing it required the same level of institutional conviction in the opposite direction. And by late 2025, that conviction had been building quietly inside Honda's planning divisions for months. On February 3rd, 2026, Honda's Ohio manufacturing complex was officially retooled. The announcement framed it as a flexible hub capable of producing internal combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles on the same line, depending on what the market demanded. That was the first public signal. Flexible manufacturing is not the language of a company doubling down on EVs. It is the language of a company hedging, or more precisely, Ironically, a company that had already made a decision and was preparing the infrastructure to execute it. March 12, 2026 was the detonation. Honda announced the cancellation of the Honda Zero SUV, the Honda Zero Saloon, and the Acura R SXE Vi for the North American market. 3 vehicles gone. The Honda Zero series had been presented at CES just 14 months earlier as the future of the brand. Sleek, software-defined, purpose-built for the electric age. The Acura R SXE Vi was supposed to be the luxury halo product that proved Honda could compete with Tesla and Rivian at the premium end. Both erased from the North American roadmap in a single announcement. The $11 billion Canadian EV plant was officially postponed. Billions in committed capital redirected. Then came May 14th, 2026. CEO Maibi announced a 3 trillion yen cut to Honda's EV and software investment through 2030. 3 trillion yen. That is approximately 20 billion US dollars in a single announcement. The scale of that capital reallocation is almost difficult to process. This was not trimming a program. This was a structural pivot of the entire company's investment thesis. But here's what made March and May 2026 different from a simple retreat. On the same day as the May announcement, Honda unveiled next-generation hybrid prototypes, not concepts. Prototypes, vehicles close enough to production that the powertrain specifications, the platform architecture, and the manufacturing timelines were all part of the briefing. Honda was not pulling back from the future. It was redefining what its future looked like. The capital that had been allocated to BEV development was not disappearing. It was being redirected toward hybrid systems, flexible manufacturing, and a product lineup built around what customers were actually buying. This was not a retreat, it was a relaunch, and the industry had never seen anything like it at this scale. But here's what makes Honda's pivot genuinely dangerous to every other automaker in the segment. Honda is not retreating to hybrids because it has no other option. Honda is attacking with hybrids because it has a 20-year head start. The hybrid platform is not new territory for Honda. The Insight, launched in 1999, was one of the first mass-market hybrid vehicles ever sold in the United States. The Accord Hybrid, the CR-V Hybrid, and successive generations of Honda's 2-motor IMMD system have given the company a depth of real-world hybrid engineering data that very few manufacturers can match. While other automakers were scrambling to build battery electric platforms from scratch, Honda had been quietly refining hybrid architecture for 2 decades. That institutional knowledge is not something you can buy or license quickly. It is built through millions of vehicles, millions of miles, and thousands of engineering iterations. The scale of Honda's hybrid offensive is significant. 15 new Honda and Acura hybrid models are planned globally by 2030. 15 across both brands, across multiple segments, from compact sedans to full-size SUVs. The next-generation hybrid architecture that Honda is building around targets meaningfully improved fuel economy over current systems, while simultaneously reducing system costs. Honda's engineering teams have publicly stated that the new hybrid cost curve is approaching internal combustion engine margins. That is the critical number. When a hybrid system costs nearly the same to build as a comparable ICE powertrain, the loss leader math that defined the EV era simply does not apply. The Ohio manufacturing complex is the operational backbone of the strategy. Flexible manufacturing, the ability to produce ICE, hybrid, and electric vehicles on the same production line, means Honda is not locked into a single demand forecast 5 years in advance. If hybrid demand accelerates faster than projected, Ohio can scale up. If a specific region shows stronger EV interest, the line can accommodate that too. This is an industrial strategy built for uncertainty, which is exactly what the current market demands. Compare that to the approach of building a dedicated BEV-only factory at a cost of $11 billion, then hoping the demand materializes to fill it. The flexible model is simply more resilient. The profitability argument is equally compelling. Honda's hybrid vehicles are not loss leaders. The CR-V Hybrid and Accord Hybrid both carry positive margins. They do not require government subsidies to reach a competitive price point. They do not require a charging infrastructure build-out that costs trillions of dollars and decades of construction. They work everywhere, for every buyer, on day one. That is not a small advantage. In a market where consumer confidence in EVs has been shaken by subsidy removal and charging reliability concerns, it is a decisive one. Honda's IMMD system, now entering its 3rd generation, is worth examining in specific terms. The current CR-V hybrid achieves an EPA-rated 40 miles per gallon combined. The next generation architecture is targeting a meaningful improvement beyond that figure, with Honda engineers citing advances in power control unit efficiency and a new lithium-ion battery chemistry that reduces internal resistance at low temperatures. That cold weather performance gap has been one of the most persistent real-world criticisms of hybrid systems in northern markets. Honda is engineering directly at that weakness, and the prototype data presented in May 2026 showed measurable gains in sub-freezing efficiency compared to the outgoing system. The Acura brand is central to the offensive in a way that often gets overlooked. Acura's ZDX had been positioned as a luxury BEV flagship. With that program now redirected, Acura's engineering resources are being channeled into a next-generation sport hybrid architecture specifically designed to compete with BMW's xDrive hybrid lineup and Mercedes-Benz's EQ hybrid variants in the $35,000 to $60,000 segment. That is the exact price band where hybrid value propositions are most compelling to buyers who want performance and efficiency without the charging infrastructure dependency. Honda is not ceding the premium segment, it is re-entering it on different terms, and with a cost structure its German competitors cannot currently match. Honda's hybrid offensive is not a fallback plan, it is the plan, and it is built on a foundation that took 20 years to construct. Now here is the part that makes engineers stop and think. The argument for hybrids was always there. The data was always there. The industry just chose to ignore it because the policy environment made BEVs look like the only rational bet. The fundamental consumer objections to battery electric vehicles have not changed since the technology went mainstream. Range anxiety is real. The average American drives about 37 miles per day, which should theoretically make range a non-issue for most BEV owners. But the anxiety is not about average days, it is about worst-case days. Road trips, cold snaps in January when battery range drops 20 to 30%. Rural areas where the nearest fast charger is 40 miles away. Hybrids eliminate all of those concerns entirely. You fill up at any gas station on Earth. You drive as far as you need to. The electric motor handles the efficiency gains. The combustion engine handles the range. The system is seamless. The total cost of ownership argument is equally clear. A battery electric vehicle carries a battery pack that represents a significant portion of the vehicle's total value. Battery degradation over time is real. Replacement costs for a full battery pack can run anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 or more, depending on the vehicle. For the average buyer keeping a car for 8 to 10 years, that is a genuine financial risk sitting in the back of their mind every time they look at a BEV purchase. Honda's hybrid systems, by contrast, have a track record measured in decades. The battery packs in Honda hybrids are smaller, cheaper, and have demonstrated extraordinary longevity in real-world use. The reliability data from the Accord hybrid and CR-V hybrid programs is exceptional. Resale values on Honda hybrids have historically been strong precisely because buyers trust the technology. J.D. Power's 2025 U.S. Vehicle Dependability Study ranked Honda hybrid models among the top 3 in their respective segments for long-term reliability. That is not a marketing claim. That is third-party data collected from hundreds of thousands of actual owners over 3-year ownership periods. Consumer Reports similarly awarded the CR-V hybrid its top reliability score in the compact SUV category for 3 consecutive years through 2025. When Honda tells a buyer that its hybrid system will last the life of the vehicle without major powertrain intervention, there is a documented evidence base behind that claim that no BEV manufacturer can currently match at equivalent scale. Honda's new hybrid architecture is targeting a system cost that approaches ICE parity. When that target is hit, and Honda's engineering teams believe it will be hit within the current product cycle, the price premium for choosing a hybrid over a standard gasoline vehicle shrinks to nearly nothing. At that point, the buyer gets meaningfully better fuel economy, lower running costs, and a familiar ownership experience for essentially the same purchase price as a comparable ICE vehicle. That is not a niche value proposition. That is a mass market value proposition. The infrastructure argument deserves more attention than it typically receives in mainstream coverage. The United States has approximately 145,000 public EV charging stations as of early 2026, according to the Department of Energy. That sounds substantial until you compare it to the approximately 145,000 gasoline stations already in operation. The difference is that gasoline stations are distributed across rural, suburban, and urban markets with near-perfect coverage. Public fast chargers are heavily concentrated in coastal urban corridors. For a buyer in rural Ohio, central Tennessee, or western Kansas, the EV charging network is not a minor inconvenience. It is a genuine barrier to ownership. Honda's hybrid lineup sidesteps that infrastructure gap entirely and does so without requiring any government investment to close it. The EPA's technology-agnostic ruling means Honda earns full regulatory compliance credit for every hybrid it sells. No penalties, no offset purchases, no cross-subsidization of EV losses to meet fleet emissions targets. The regulatory and financial case closes itself completely. Honda sells a product that buyers want, at a price that works, with margins that are positive under a regulatory framework that rewards the choice. That is what a sustainable business model looks like. The EV-first strategy was never that clean, and the numbers always knew it. Honda's move is a signal flare. Ford bleeds billions. GM delays programs. Toyota, mocked for years for backing hybrids, now looks prescient. 15 Honda and Acura hybrids arrive by 2030. The question is,